When Meghan Markle, first joined the British royal family, there was this big story being planted around the media about how she was arriving as a very independent, strong, powerful woman. That was the imagery that Meghan wanted to plant. Ever since, of course, the interview with none other than Vanity Fair, they felt that this was the image that Meghan really, truly deserved. So did she. And Prince Harry, of course, went along with this particular imagery because he didn't want to be seen as sort of, marrying somebody lesser than himself. If you remember when Harry first brought Meghan into the fray, the story goes, in fact, that Harry, said, "Look what I've got," as if it was some sort of prized cheese at a, local raffle or something. And of course, Meghan, totally different, very assured of herself, very stunning lady at that point. And more importantly, what was very kind of different about her, some people might say, was the fact that she seemed head on with the media. That was a telling point, let me tell you, even at that very famous engagement sort of thing in the area of Kensington Gardens. This was no shrinking violet. You could see this. She was directing it. She knew exactly the way that she was going to look, but still playing it cottishly at this point in order to make, of course, Prince Harry feel that he'd got something rather special. And he clearly did. He was very much, as you could see, in love with this particular lady. But you see, right back at the very start of this, money was a central point for Meghan and Harry. Literally, it was their guiding force. For Meghan, she felt, according to a well-placed source, that in fact, she was going to have a lot of money moving into the British monarchy. And Harry seemingly had never corrected her on these points. You see, when you're a member of the British monarchy, you're not rich. You're rich on paper. Yes, as the Queen pointed out, the only thing she truly owned was her name, and they stole that from her, Lilibet. The paintings on the wall, the grand palaces, they're all part of another, generation. You just keep passing it on. While you're here on planet Earth, yes, you are one of the richest people. Meghan hadn't really grasped that, and according to a source, Prince Harry wasn't very keen to make her aware. You see, Harry was coming to being independently wealthy, or so everybody thought, around about the time of when the money left to him by his late mother, Princess Diana, would come into force. But you see, Harry's not being clever with money, and the reason being is he's never dealt with money. Worse than that, the money that he had, he's got through it because he's had a nice lifestyle, and everything else has been paid for by his father. And now, currently, of course, our king, King Charles III. You see, way back just before the wedding, they were already plotting and scheming how they could control and make money. The sort of former head of Disney at that point, who I knew, Jeffrey Katzenberg, recalls being called to a meeting with Meghan and Harry at Kensington Palace, where he was starting this fledgling streaming company that we would now, know all about. But at that particular point, it was very much in its infancy. And apparently the things that they were interested in were certainly not going to be the things that he felt would help sell the streaming company. Netflix was shrewd in their movement of the way they maneuvered that particular story. But what's interesting, you see, and more importantly, what Meghan and Harry thought was, Meghan particularly, that this was a stepping stone into getting into grander things. Wonderful palaces, a big profile, build the profile, move on quite quickly and monetize it yourself. And you see, as we've seen today, Meghan and Harry are struggling, whichever way you look at it, with money. People blast around these big deals like £1 million a year as Chief Impact Officer for BetterUp. Is it really £1 million a year? Does Meghan Markle truly make all of that money, literally from Netflix? And what about the commissionable sales that she now has on her Instagram page, which is pretty low, to say the least? Well, in today's royal appointment, I want to share with you what I've discovered about exactly where Meghan and Harry's revenue stream truly now is at this moment in time. And a lot of the things may shock you because, as I say, what you often find in this game is that people tell you, oh, people are incredibly rich. I work with lots of celebrities who are rich, should be rich, and literally cannot even afford a cup of coffee when you're out with them. Meghan and Harry aren't at that point yet, but their continued rash spending is certainly taking them to career down that particular path. And is there anything that Harry can simply do to stop it? As ever, let me explain. As I said, the story goes that Meghan Markle came with £5 million when she first arrived inside the British monarchy. And I will put that out there now and say utter rubbish. As an actress in a mid-fielding sort of show, she would have been well paid, literally by yours and I standards, but certainly not in the millions. And she would not have made all of that much money from her lifestyle vlog thing, whatever you want to call it, the TIG. You just wouldn't make that level of money. And as we saw with Vanity Fair and previous things that have gone on in the past, Meghan knew exactly how to bag the freebie. And I've seen this time and time again with celebrities. Let me tell you, chums, I've had and worked with celebrities who've been coming into the studio and been there for an interview with someone, or indeed myself for a chat show or whatever, and they've stolen the very expensive lipsticks out of the makeup girl's bag in the makeup room. You know the ones I'm talking about? Chanel, Clinique, accidentally just fell in their bag. I remember working with one celebrity who insisted that we went and got a pair of tights before she went on air because she'd snagged them, right? And what was interesting about this was then she went to the runner and said, could he get 20 pairs? They were from Harrods and around about £35 per pair. Hosiery, I think it's called in other parts of the world, sorry. And the thing was, we just stamped on that straight away because clearly, she thought, I'm giving my time. And she was there to plug a play actually at the point. But what was fascinating was she thought she could get as many things as she could. And then when she was leaving, let me tell you, she asked for a cab. And I said, right, where's the cab going? Oh, she didn't know. So I said, well, if you let me know, I'll let you know whether we can get you a cab. Turns out we were in central London. She wanted one back to Windsor because she was appearing in a play. Imagine the cost of that. They all are on the take. Now, when you're dealing with somebody like me directly, I wouldn't have it. But if you're dealing with a publicist and perhaps, you're a big magazine company and you don't care about the cab or the clothes that the, person is borrowing, well, then that's not a problem. And that's really the world that Meghan Markle truly grew up in that particular celebrity moment. And what she was really looking for was to find a way of defining herself, making sure that she could have all of those wonderful glamorous clothes for free. And as we pointed out in a previous interview and video, truly what she thought was when all of these clothes turned up for her at Kensington Palace initially and then at Windsor, she could keep them. And very tactfully, it had to be pointed out that in fact you didn't keep these clothes. You could wear them, you couldn't reference them, but that was the deal. But right from the off, even from the Wellington boots and the bag outside Kensington Palace with Whole Foods and all of that, Meghan and her team never relinquished the power. You see, she never got rid of the manager or the agent or the publicist because this was their payday too. They were thrilled at the idea that finally their client was going to be making some money for them. Everybody sniffs money and everybody wants a part of it, right? Now again, what happened a little bit further down the line is Harry himself would have made out that he was very rich, and as ever we have to say allegedly. Why not? He is of course the youngest son of the future King of England, and Meghan, not knowing how the operational things work, would have no idea. But cast your mind back, you see, if you remember, the Prince of Wales famously said, King Charles now at the time, he couldn't afford Meghan. Catherine, you see, was different. She'd been schooled after many years of knowing exactly what royal protocol was. Meghan, thought this was just a Pandora's box. Open the box, take the frocks, wear them, look pretty for 5 minutes and keep box. And then maybe sell them on, right? That's the deal. So where are they at right now with their big money deals? Well, the problem that you have is simply Meghan and Harry have had an exceptional start to the way that they live. I mean, she recently said on that Netflix cooking show that she didn't live like this all the time. If you remember, she wasn't always like this. She claimed that she lived on Jack-in-a-Box snack food and was a latchkey kid. She changes the story all the time. Of course, the father, right, is telling the truth, in my opinion, because clearly he worked hard, sent her to the best restaurants, sent her to the best schools, and gave Meghan an education that was required in order to manipulate the way that she does today. But the money situation is fascinating in itself because, as I said, the bigger payer at the start of the relationship, particularly when they decided to, abscond and go down the route of Megxit, was only Prince Harry. Nobody truly was interested in Meghan Markle. And this really was more defined about exactly the money, for instance, with their very big pay deal with Penguin Random House. Let me explain. With Penguin Random House, they just wanted one person, Prince Harry. There was this chance to get the book, yes, the youngest son of the king, to tell his story. But of course, they manipulated him, some people might say, into saying, well, you have to be totally open and tell us exactly a story. Now, the story is quite boring because it's out there. It's been in documentations, endless documentaries on his late mother, Princess Diana, and he's done joint interviews, of course, previously with his elder brother, Prince William, the Prince of Wales. So there wasn't really that much juice. And you see, what Harry needed to do was deliver some juice. And really, sitting down there, what have you got? So consequently, when he famously said to people like Anderson Cooper and Tom Bradbury that, well, I could have written far more, he could, but it was a lot of the same drivel. There wasn't really that many interesting facets to Harry's life. The army was indisputable because who was there but him? And people are not going to come out because it's army code. So realistically, you wouldn't have got the situation that you got. You see what I mean? Now, what Harry decided to do was delve deep into his psyche. And apparently, pushed on by his wife, Meghan, he really needed to expose those dark inner feelings that he was going through every time in his major therapy sessions. Harry famously said, if you remember, that actually senior members of the British monarchy could all benefit from going to therapy. Really? If it makes you like you, that's what they must be thinking, right? But what's interesting is Harry decided very quickly, alongside Meghan, who was pivotal in the shaping of this book, that he needed to go dark and deeper. So he dug dark and deeper and decided, of course, that Camilla, the stepmother, was dangerous, difficult, and not to be trusted. Spilling secrets to the media, oh, dreadful. And then, of course, when he focused a little bit on his father, who probably came out of it the best, one might say, well, he was detached and didn't know how to show emotion and literally stunk of eau sauvage by Christian Dior. Terrible thing to write about your father, right? But he really sort of wanted to hold off Catherine and William because he knew that Catherine was incredibly popular and nobody really was going to buy and bite into the many stories that he came up with. But there were other big pay deals, and as that was being shaped, he famously said that, of course, he signed with Netflix when he spoke to Oprah Winfrey because he had no option. He was being left there with no money. Not true again. His father, as we know, was supplementing him for a year, but it wasn't enough money, certainly not for Megxie, who needed a lot more money. She wanted a big house. She wanted security. She wanted the dogs. She wanted designer clothes. He just went on and on and on. And Harry had to provide. He'd promised, hadn't he, to look after her. And when they left, she couldn't be in the United Kingdom because she could be like Princess Diana the second time around. And he sees her as Diana the second coming. It's all been detailed, apparently, how when, he introduced her to family members, they apparently could not see the same resemblance to the facet of personality of his late mother. Incredible to think when you do look at it like that. So behind the scenes, Harry had to go to work. And that really was the reasoning behind things like Better Up. But there were other deals, right? Netflix's deal was actually cemented virtually a year before inside Kensington Palace. As ever, we have to say allegedly, but it's on that documentation. It was finalised with the, what they were going to pay. And everybody knew in that Netflix meeting why they had Prince Harry there. See, Harry talks about, we were going to make this raft of programmes, and people forgot that the first one out of the bag had to be Meghan. It just had to be her. And this thing with Pearl, that was going to be a sort of a cartoony thing, was going to do wonders. Harry insisted she had to have the first launch. Utter disaster, never got made, useless, even with the people like Elton John and David Furnish. Nobody was interested, They knew this was a dud. The selling point was the docuseries. And of course, they knew if they could get Harry to spill on camera, that would be worth some of the money. They got paid in 4 instalments, and the full instalments are still not paid. I can tell you that 100%. And you see, what you get is it's 4 instalments and you deliver certain levels of product, right? Now, the next big product after, of course, Netflix had been signed, as I say, previous to that, was this one, was Spotify, worth millions. And this really was the piece de resistance. But where did all that money go? Well, as ever, Spotify came knocking. This would have been the best deal, I would have thought, for both Meghan and Harry. And whatever Spotify say, the 20 million that's banded around, they did not get 20 million. Let me tell you that for a starter, right? What happened, it took them, as we know, a year to get this together, this disaster of an idea that they came up with. And this was going to be marvellous and all that sort of stuff. But they'd never thought of anything, you know. Meghan is just a person who's been a bit part actress and a game show hostess in Deal or No Deal. So everything's presented to you, you know. This is what you're going to say, this is where you're going to stand. Somebody's going to give you the clothes, hair and makeup. She'd never developed anything. Writing and scribbling notes about herself and the TIG does not constitute producing content. And even a podcast takes a bit of while. It's not hard to put a podcast together, you know, really, if you've got talented people around you. And I admire many people out on this particular platform that turn them around with great aplomb. Very interesting topics. But, you know, Harry wanted to interview the Pope and Putin. Yes, that's because he felt he could. He was a, you know, person of the royal family. Why couldn't he get that? Don't be ridiculous, it's Harry. So again, where this got interesting was Spotify were going to humour them. But what they wanted really was the content, if you like, that Oprah Winfrey had got, that Netflix had got. They wanted more of that. Do not forget that Netflix were absolutely steaming bricks when they revealed their daughter on the Oprah Winfrey show, you know, the gender reveal. Remember that, before the family and everything else. You know, Netflix had shelled out all this money and suddenly Oprah Winfrey's now getting it. Well, what about the deal with Oprah Winfrey? Where did that money go? Well, again, let me tell you, the lion's share of that went to the production team. Harry and Meghan didn't come out of that particularly well. All right, you know, a couple of mil, but not really at the level where you would imagine. And this was because Oprah Winfrey, a very shrewd person in business, right, knew that in Meghan Markle's eyes, she was up there with, you know, the demigods. Meghan wanted to sit opposite one of her heroines, Oprah Winfrey. I met Oprah Winfrey and I've worked with her on a professional level when we've linked up to various studios via my studio. And it's a very slick operation, you know, very cold, very calculating. But Meghan wouldn't care. This is Oprah Winfrey, somebody that she's admired for years and would put her on her personal platform. She couldn't believe that Oprah Winfrey was going to sit opposite her, literally, and ask her, I mean, this is like beyond, you know. So Oprah was very keen and very savvy to get a very quick deal down. And again, where this gets interesting is the master tapes are held by Oprah Winfrey. So Harry and Meghan weren't savvy enough to buy the master tape of their own product. Do you understand? I don't mean that rudely, but you know, you don't own it. See, she could have chopped elements of it up and put it out, but it's the own network, Harpo Productions, that have the masters on that. He gave this incredible interview, when you think, for literally peanuts. And worse than that, and this is the big thing where they're not very clever with money, you see, they could have had a still photographer on set, and those pictures alone would have been worth a lot of money for syndication rights to magazines, to exclusives, you know, the sort of thing. You could have built this up totally differently, right? But of course they're inexperienced and the people around them, well, they didn't really know what to do. But Meghan was just thrilled. She was sat opposite Oprah Winfrey. Netflix, less so. Particularly when Harry spat out that, well, you know, he'd signed really because he was running short of money. His father had cut him off, a middle-aged man. How dare he not pay him? I mean, it's ridiculous, you know? And that really was where we were at with Prince Harry, because he was hemorrhaging. And that really is where we were at with Prince Harry, because he was literally spending a lot of money. He had no idea about money. And very quickly, Meghan Markle took charge of their personal finances. She apparently had more idea, but not clever enough to get one over on Oprah Winfrey. But back to Spotify. They waited and waited. They built them a studio. They provided all of the producers, all of the possible backup that you can really need. And the idea, again, was going to originally be Harry and Meghan meeting people. But very quickly, Harry was shoehorned out of the idea. Remember, she exploited him at the beginning when they launched the first podcast and said, your accent's better than mine, you introduce it, you know, flattering the ego, right? But really, she had no intention of him. She wanted it to be her. Goes right back to what I was saying before about Pearl. And you see, the lion's share of the money was all paid to Prince Harry. hence the reason they set up Archwell Productions. And if you look at the accounts on there, it's a fascinating read because it tells you very much so where that money went. Now, when they did the Disney voiceover, and Meghan did that, that is very much muddy waters. Nobody's quite sure where that payment went. If you'd care to share with me, Meghan, I know you watch this show on a regular basis, let us know. I'm sure it's all above board, dear. But it's fascinating to think, because it's not actually documented. Did she just relinquish any payment, or was it all given to the Elephant Fund Foundation, whatever that was? So at this point, they're doing well, but they're not getting, let me point out, the 100 million from Netflix, the 20 million from Spotify, the X amount from Oprah Winfrey, and the Better Up. They were just figures plummeted around to make them look very successful. Everybody wants them. And then, of course, this took a turn for the worst in their financial stakes. And this has now been the trajectory of where Harry and Meghan are in a financial level. And this is very worrying, let me tell you, for somebody like the ex-royal. This is very worrying, you see, for Prince Harry, because without money, rich wives get bored. They need something. And as Meghan has pointed out recently on that Netflix show, it was the first time that her children had seen her at work. Work! In a rented house, bagging a few pretzels. I mean, if this is the sort of thing that apparently Lilibet's going to think, wow, this is a powerful woman, good on you, sister, for getting that over. But it's hardly the sort of thing that somebody would say, this is work. But Meghan had bigger plans, because as Harry's money started to seep away, all thanks to doing the next phase, well, let me explain. The biggest money loss that Meghan and Harry lost out upon was none other than the fact that, they decided to get legal, and legal costs a lot of money. And really, for Meghan and Harry, they couldn't stop themselves because they felt very aggrieved. If you remember, they were very upset with certain individual magazines and tabloids, and they were not having this. They were going to run their lives totally differently, and this was going to be, well, the way that you were going to answer to them. They decided that they weren't going to speak to certain individual media organisations, certainly not tabloids, and they were going to give grassroots journalists the opportunity to interview them. Didn't really work out like that, though, did it? Nobody was particularly interested. And of course, really what happened was most of the tabloids found out the stories anyway, because leaky staff leaving, really high salaries at, Archwell, that really did not merit the job. But again, clueless people running an operation. And this is the problem. They've had a lot of money. Somebody comes in and says, this is what you need to do. I can be your DG or whatever. And oh, right, you know what you're doing. They don't know what they're doing. They take the money, and after 3, 5, 6, 9 months, they're gone with a potload of your money. And this has happened time and time again. The only thing they've been good at is circulating the NDAs and making sure at this point, this is where they're at. There were talks, you see, that Harry and Meghan were going so well, they were even going to get their own private jet, allegedly. And this really was to counteract the claim that they were, borrowing private jets, loaning private jets. Let's not forget, Sir Elton John, that's right, Keir Starmer's chum, well, he basically said he'd loaned them it because he felt sorry for them and he wanted to look after them. But, we could go, well, we couldn't really fly. Bad for the climate, travelers to all that. And then, of course, he tried to wing a lift, did they not, when they came over, of course, for the Platinum Jubilee on Air Force One with the then President of the United States. Money was literally going away too quickly, and not a lot of it was coming in. Now, they'd had the lump sum of money from Netflix, right? In the sense they delivered the docu-series. That was what they wanted. Now, what happened in the next phase is fascinating, and not many people know this. Polo was part and parcel of a deal, so they had to make it. And my belief is, and as ever, I have to say allegedly, is this. I think Harry didn't want to make it, but it was a part of the contract. He had to deliver something. But Netflix were assured the big money spinner was going to be Meghan's latest, With Love Meghan or American Riviera Orchard. That was the one that was going to make the money. And even recently, Ted, the boss, of course, of Netflix, was forced out to say, oh, whatever they do turns to gold, they're fabulous, all that sort of stuff. And then, there was this problem, and this has been the biggest problem for Meghan and Harry, the huge costs of running that mansion. You see, they don't really mix with people. They don't have any credible stance. So the deal was that they picked up a lot of awards. And the idea with the awards, and this was what the management team thought would work, was pick up awards, get some exposure for positivity. The deals would come in, like Dior, like Cartier. Well, Dior, again, pulled a very fast one on Prince Harry. And this is, again, fascinating stuff. You know, he wore their outfit for the Platinum Jubilee. Somebody was the coronation of the Platinum Jubilee. But either way, he wore the outfit on a major state occasion, right? They got masses of publicity. Didn't do well for them, though, because he hadn't bothered to steam it or iron it, right? But nonetheless, there you have Harry. Now, there was a deal, right? There was some money across that deal, but certainly not enough of what you would have thought somebody of that stance should have got. But really, Harry was hoping that that deal would transcend to his wife. Suddenly, she will become the international queen of Dior. Makes sense, right? But it didn't come through because the negativity of the media continual, whether it be the fallout with the father, whether it be staff leaving, all of those problems were literally racking up. And they realised, well, we've kind of got that. Now, did the sales of when Harry popped up on that particular outfit, did they rock up for Dior? Not really, no. You know, what they got was a lot of press coverage, and that was nice and free. But nobody thought, we must get my wedding outfit or my tails and top hat and everything for that, for the coronation. Nobody was bothered. But they got free publicity. And then they went very cool on Meghan Markle. And this was going to be a mega million deal, right? Somehow that hadn't been nailed down. A proper team would have had that nailed down before Prince Harry stepped foot and sliding into Dior for such an historic royal occasion. You see how they're a little bit slippy on getting the deals together now? So it comes to this quarter of today. The bottom line is now they're looking for options, ways to make money. And the idea really was that Meghan was going to step up to the fore, Harry was going to resolve all of these court cases. And then once they were resolved and he got the biggest problem that he needed resolving, well, once he got that, and the big problem was this, he needed the extra cost of the security that Meghan requires out in the United Kingdom and, more importantly, out in the United States. We saw recently when she popped to Broadway, well, consequently, she needed a 4 motorcade thing just to go and see a little bit of a show on Broadway. Who knew that she was turning up? Who cared? Did you see teams of fans outside the theatre? No, because even though they tipped them off, nobody was bothered. It's not that interesting. And that goes back to what was happening a couple of days ago about where the paparazzi said, you know, they're not really worth that much money anymore. I pointed out recently how the sale of their photographs could have been worth a lot of money, but it's now dwindling away. So are Harry and Meghan going broke? Issues right now for Harry and Meghan are indeed very concerning regarding incoming funds. Deals are not what they were, and of course the deals that they have truly expired. You see, Meghan's now moved back into this world of, podcasting with a little known company called Lemonada. And as I pointed out, there was no big advance on that particular company. What's happening, it's a very simple thing in fact, is that basically you've got to sing for your supper. If you get that audience to come along and, bond with you, then it's a split deal. You will get part of the sales that are literally downloads. So the more people listen, the richer you become. As for Better Up and Prince Harry, that's a very precarious state because many people inside that particular camp are unhappy given the fact that the workspace, the workforce or whatever, some are not necessarily looking at long-term futures. You get the picture. But the biggest, most damaging problem really is their ability to align themselves with charity, particularly with the ongoing Charity Commission and a huge investigation into Centre Barley, not playing out well whatsoever. Now, they continue to pick up lots and lots of awards popping up here and there, everything from just having 2 children to the greatest aviation award from John Travolta, but that doesn't pay bills. You see, that's your problem. Now, Harry, you have to remember again, made another huge boo-boo when he was doing his Spare. Because you see, with the level of celebrity that he has with Penguin Random House, he could have just said, I'll do 3 interviews for the book. or 2 sit-down interviews with television, 1 with a magazine, something like that. The rest of them I will organise through my own agency management, and we will charge accordingly. So for instance, the Stephen Colbert, you could have charged a lot of money, but it was part of the deal to promote the book. You see what I mean? Whoever's advised them along the way, in my opinion, has not been very savvy. There were other elements that Harry could have done. He could have done a live theatre tour, making sure the audience were very much vetted for security, that sort of stuff. But, he could have sold a lot of books, a lot of tickets, and a lot of merchandise. Because this is the line, this is the sort of rule that is now down. It's about selling what you can, and it's about selling you, the brand, right? That is the deal. And that would have made a lot of money, genuinely, You could have had all sorts of things, sweatshirts, baseball hats. The merchandise would have done quite well. But as we've seen, their reluctance to promote, say, something that's apparently very passionate and close to their heart, like Invictus, well, that didn't seem to bother them, did it? They weren't too keen on that. Now, Meghan herself, right, what we saw with her idea for the future to make a lot of money, and this was with As Ever or American Riviera Orchard or with Love Meghan, whatever, well, that hasn't really taken off either. The jams are not exactly flying off the shelves. There was no real merchandise to buy alongside it, whether she'd done a deal with perhaps, a kitchenware company or even a kitchen towel company, something where she could have made money. Everything slips through their fingers, whether being ill-advised or simply just not savvy enough to know their value. And as their sort of stock plummets now on a dramatic basis, they have to look around and think, what can we sell next? Now, there are these veiled threats, of course, about Harry writing sequel 2. There's no way Penguin Random House are going to be paying that level of money again. They didn't make the return on the first book, despite what they say, right? They sold books, but, when you look at the discounts and the contra deals and giving away frees and all that sort of stuff, no, it's not that level of money. So Meghan, of course, has now been reduced, some might say, to flocking her edits on her Instagram page where she gets commissionable payment. I mean, how far really do you have to fall before you look and think this is not good, right? But again, this is truly where they're at. Money-wise, they can continue to make money, and there's no 2 ways about it, but they're going to have to lower their sights. They can get everything from speaking tours to going up and down on cruises and being ambassadors for something like that. But the future looks relatively grim. They're not broke, but they're certainly not raking in the dollars that they did, say, 2, 3, 5 years ago. People have shown less interest, and to activate that interest is going to be very difficult. You see, if you don't believe me, think about this. They never instructed any legal attack at all on the book Revenge. Vanity Fair, no legal attack, right? And then, of course, the Hollywood Reporter, nothing. These are all very costly, and they're not quite sure they can win them. Hence the reason they've pulled back on their personal attacks. It's all very well saying it's baseless rumour. Well, if it's so baseless and you feel you can win, why not attack these people that are writing such negative things about you, like shopping around a pre-divorce book or something like that? It just doesn't make sense. What does make sense is we're now seeing a brand new era of Harry and Meghan perhaps having to snap their purse shut, when before money really was no object. And while Meghan, of course, may want to shop around the outfit that she wore on Broadway, really, is this going to keep them in the lavish lifestyle that she, as she pointed out, has now become accustomed? She didn't always used to live like this. She didn't, and she may not forever in the future. It's a developing story. When I know more, you'll know more. As ever, thank you so much for taking the time out to join me for a very special by royal appointment. And as ever, do please like, share and comment respectfully. Neil Sean in the very heart of London.